10 Fat Years. That's the title of Joe Coletti's latest John Locke Foundation research brief. Joe is Senior Fellow in Fiscal Studies. And Joe, I understand that's your description of how things have gone since Republicans took control of the General Assembly and put the brakes on government spending.
Yeah, what we're looking at is we've had 10 really good years for North Carolina as a whole and for the people of North Carolina as taxpayers, and also as we look at it now, right, the 10 fat years, you think about Joseph and Pharaoh, and during the good years, you prepare for the lean years, and you take a look at where North Carolina is compared to other states and where we could have been and where we've been in past recessions. And we did the right things. The legislature did the right things during those good years to get us through the lean times that we could have faced right now.
Yeah, and despite the fact that you could describe them as 10 fat years, they haven't all been good. We've had hurricanes, we've had other problems, yet we're still in a pretty good financial situation.
Yeah, and all of this goes to the spending restraint that the General Assembly did. That's what you should be doing in good years, is keeping a lid on spending so that you can build savings, you can return money to taxpayers, and you can weather those storms when they come, whether that's an actual hurricane, whether that's an earthquake, or whether that's a pandemic shutdown like we're in. And that's what the General Assembly has been able to do.
For those who haven't been following this very closely, tell us a little bit about what the General Assembly has done and the target it has used to limit the size of spending growth.
Sure. The target that we've talked about and that they've been using without any imposition from anything is keeping spending in line with population and inflation, so that in real terms, inflation-adjusted terms, the cost of government for you and for me does not go up from year to year. And that's what the General Assembly has been able to do for the past 10 years, keeping it about 2.5% spending growth in the general fund, and is a huge contrast compared to the 2001 to 2010 decade, when spending was growing and grew at such a rate that by 2008, from 2003 to 2008, spending was 10% higher than what you would have expected if they had kept that real spending in line with population. So that was a $2 billion excess spending at that time that was more than overcome when they had to reduce spending during that recession. And this year, that is not what has had to happen.
If people read the research brief, they will get a lot of details about how things have played out differently over the past decade than over the first decade of this millennium. You also emphasize the fact that despite that spending growth being limited, legislators have still been able to spend lots of money on priorities like education and Medicaid.
Yeah, 2.5% growth per year still ends up being about $5 billion increase over the last decade. And half of that was for public schools, for K-12 schools, teachers, and other uses. And another $1.5 billion was increased Medicaid spending. So that's $4 billion roughly out of the $5 billion increase. And so those are the two biggest components of state government. It makes sense that they should be getting the most spending. And it kind of goes against the narrative that this spending cap and this spending restraint has damaged schools or the health of poor people.
Let's talk about something that you alluded to a little bit earlier, and that was that this spending restraint has been done despite the lack of any imposition by either law or the state constitution or something else forcing lawmakers to keep this spending in check. But there's a proposal now called a Taxpayer Bill of Rights that actually would put this in place. Tell us about that and why that would be helpful.
Yeah, Taxpayer Bill of Rights says that basically what we've been doing, what the General Assembly's been doing for the last 10 years, would become part of the Constitution, and that to increase taxes would require a vote of the people to get that permission. There's a version in the House that says 2/3 majority of members of the legislature. Either way is a significant improvement. But what that does is it just locks into place, regardless of who's in power in the future, just continues this good decade and ensures that it continues on.
Before we wrap up, we also should point out that this has had implications as well for tax policy, for attracting people into the state. What are some of the other benefits that we see because government is not overspending?
Yeah, well, when you're not spending as much, you don't need to tax as much, and we've seen that's why North Carolina has been able to reduce the personal income tax rate and increase the standard deduction, what we call the zero tax bracket. Those people who don't have to pay anything in state income tax has been able to reduce the corporate income tax rate, and the value of that just this year alone is somewhere between $2.5 and $3.5 billion for taxpayers, and because there's a certainty, there's a surety that North Carolina is not going to need to raise taxes because we haven't been balancing our budget on higher taxes. North Carolina is a big recipient of people migrating from the rest of the country. We're sixth in the country when it comes to inward migration, and the economy has been doing well. Personal income has been growing. Per capita does not go as well because we're getting more people in, and when they come in, they're bringing non-working children, and sometimes we're talking about non-working retired folks too. So grandparents want to be here. So it's a great place. People want to be here. The economy is doing very well, and we see that with even the recent announcements from Apple and other companies that they're going to set up shop here as well.
If you'd like to learn much more, you can go to the John Locke website, johnlocke.org, and find the research brief with the title 10 Fat Years. Its author is Joe Coletti. He is Senior Fellow in Fiscal Studies at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you, Mitch.